for tuning in for another D6 pack video. Today I'm going to be attempting my first video review of a board game. And to start out with, I've picked not an easy game for myself, so please be gentle, but I'm going to be reviewing Bora Bora by Stefan Feld and published by Ravensburger Games. So this is a heavier game, but I kind of wanted to test myself for my first review. So let me switch my camera around and I'll show you guys what it's about. So this is what a typical setup for the game might look like. This is set up for a 4-player game. I've actually only played this 2-player, but it scales pretty well. You just flip over some of these tiles, which shrinks the amount of potential spaces that players can go so that there's a little bit more competition for action spaces. But just for these purposes, it might be easier to explain having them separate. You're only seeing like half of the player board here, but this half of the player board is just kind of a reminder of everything that I'm going over here. So if you are interested in the game, you can see that when you buy it. These are some of the resources that you start with. You start with some goals, which will dictate kind of what you're trying to do throughout the game. So the game starts out with, there are 6 rounds. So at the beginning of each round, each player is going to simultaneously roll their 3 dice, and then they take actions based on their die values. If you want to place one of your die on an action space that someone is already at, you have to place a die of a lower value. So if, for example, there's a 6 and a 4 in this space, if I want to take that action, then I have to pay a 3 or lower in order to take it. Depending on the die value, you get to take a different power of action, I guess. So for example, these first 2 are expand, and it's land or sea, but it dictates where you can expand. So for example, if I want to expand across land here, I need a die of at least 2. If I want to go this way, I would need a die of at least 4 though. And if I do that, then I would put a hut in the space that I'm expanding to, and I would take a resource denoted by that region, and I would put that on my player board. The reason you might want to do that is because placing more huts onto the board is going to allow you more spaces to put men and women tiles into the game. The next action is collecting men and women tiles, which is determined by the die value. So the higher the die value, the more choices you have in tiles that you can take. So if you have a 3, for example, you can only choose from these men and women tiles. And they are going to give you some sort of special ability which you can take in the next phase of the game. You get to take 1 man and woman tile, 1 action from 1 man and 1 woman tile per round. And if you have similar actions, they can stack on top of each other. So typically this guy can expand across the water space of die value 2. But if you have 2 of them, then you can double them up and you can cross a water space of 4 or less. The next action space is the helper action. Depending on the die value that you use, you get to take a certain number of actions. So there are some actions that are worth 1 pip. So if you tattoo your men, that will increase your space on the status track, dependent on how many tattoo symbols are on the side of your man there. And if you've collected this guy, for example, you would denote that you've tattooed him by sliding him down, and then you'd move up on the status track. Women collect shells in pretty much the same manner, but you would just take that many shell tokens and you would put those in your personal supply for later, which I will talk about more in a minute. And then you can always take 1 victory point for 1 point as well. However, there's also a lot of options for 2 pips. You can move one of your huts down to the 12th hut space, which increases your space for more men and women. You can take an additional offering token. You can take another god card, which is like a special power that you can use one time. Or you can take one of any resource for 2 pips. The next action is the priest track, and the higher value pip that you use, the higher you go on the priest track. And you get more points for having more priests on that track, but they are going to slide down once per round until they get to the last space, and then they go back to your supply and they are no longer on the track. The person with the most priests on this track also gets a god tile at the end of the round, which is like a free god tile of any god card of any type that you want it to be. The final action is to build. And in order to build, you need 2 resources adjacent to each other. You return those to the supply, and then you get to put one of these building tiles in that space. That gives you a certain number of points. So in the first and second round, it's 10 points. Third and fourth, it's 7. Fifth and sixth, it's 4 points. And you also get a fire bonus, which grants you either a offering token or a new god card, and either 1 shell or 1 tattoo. So that's the actions. Once everybody's taken all 3 of their actions, then you move on to the second phase, which is where you take your men and your women actions. And then you move into the third stage of the round. Oh, I did forget 1 action. You can always go up here if you don't have anything else to do with a die, and you get 2 points for that. In the third round, though, you kind of use these in order. So you identify the status track first. Whoever is farthest along this track gets to pick their turn order for the next round, and all players get points dependent on where their status marker is on the track. Then we do the priest track. That's where you get your points, which in the first and second you get 1 point per priest. Third and fourth it's 2. Fifth and sixth it's 3. And all the priests slide down, and whoever has the most priests on the track gets the god tile. Then you can use those shells that you've been having your women collect in order to buy some jewelry. The cost in shells is shown there, and that will get you some number of victory points. There are only 4 per round, but you can only buy 1, so there will always be something available for you, but that's also in turn order. So having that first early turn order is beneficial. Then each player completes at least one of their goals. If you can't complete one of your goals, there is a yellow god card, which allows you to negate one of the costs of that tile so that you can complete something. You just get 2 less victory points than would otherwise be the case. Normally you get 6 victory points for completing any goal. And then you would flip that goal over and put it in the completed pile, and then each player in turn order is going to pick a new goal. At the end of the round, we refill the goals, the men, and the women tiles. And then we start over with the next round. So I think the last thing I have to explain are the god cards. There are 5 different types of gods. So let's see if I can find some examples here. Oh, that worked out well. So the blue god allows you to spend a die of a higher value than one that's already been placed there. In order to use any of these god cards, you return the card to the discard pile, and you have to turn in an offering token as well. So blue lets you use a greater value die than you would normally be allowed to. Yellow, I kind of already talked about, allows you to turn in a goal without having fully completed it. The red god card can only be used when you are expanding. When you move into a new tile, you can score that fish, which is going to grant you some sort of point bonus, depending on the type of fish that it is. So you could get between 1 and 6 points for whatever is in that region. The white god allows you to use any die as if it were a 6. So you would still have to obey the placement rules there, but it could grant you a very powerful action for your first action, I guess. And the last card is green. That allows you to double the power of one man or one woman tile during the second round of the game. I guess I'll include this too. I also have a mini expansion which adds orange god tiles. If you at any point roll doubles, you get one of these tiles, and they can increase the value of your die or decrease the value by 1 per tile, which is kind of a simple mechanism, but I think it was a unique addition, and I don't see any reason not to include it in the game, so I always play with that one.
Alright, so that's Bora Bora. I know I didn't cover every rule in the game completely there, but hopefully I gave you enough of an idea to help you figure out for yourself whether that's something you might be interested in or not. Um, the rule book is pretty decent, so if you do buy the game, I think you can probably figure out any of the things that I left out from the rule book itself. But um, I just kind of wanted to wrap this up by giving you my opinions of the game. So I think it's a fun game. I really like worker placement style to begin with, so Bora Bora was kind of a no-brainer for me, I guess. But I will say that the one thing that I don't want to say disappointed, but the one thing that I don't necessarily like about this game is that it's very fiddly. You're replacing those goals, the men and the women tiles between each round, and that gets to be a lot of small pieces getting moved around. I do think that I intend to buy cloth bags for this, which will help with randomizing them, and I think that might help, but um, as it is, the game just looks like a mess when you open the box because it's got all these plastic bags everywhere and it doesn't look very organized, but the game plays very nicely. I think the rules are pretty solid. My main complaint is just the organization for it's not necessarily there. So, um, if you like worker placement games, I think this is one you might want to check out. Just keep that in mind. Let me know what you think. If you've played the game, uh, comment to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at D6Pack Podcast, or you can contact us by email, d6packpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like this video, please subscribe. We intend to do almost weekly content from now on. Every other week, I intend to release a video, and on the other weeks, then we will be releasing our audio podcast. So you can also find that on your favorite podcast streaming app, or SoundCloud specifically is where we post it. So thanks for listening. Bye.